This video is why I am no longer a Turo host. And you could say that I parked my Turo side hustle, shifted out of the Turo business, or the Turo gig just ran out of gas. Okay, never mind on those. I'll steer clear of puns. If you can think of any additional ones, drop them below. All right, so let's get into it. But of all channels, why listen to me? Well, I have a decade of experience in marketing and advertising, entrepreneurship, and that includes a couple collaborations with the folks like Kendall Jenner and Kevin Jonas, and I'm honed in my skills in identifying lucrative opportunities and maximizing the potential of those opportunities. So to give you a quick recap on my Turo experience, I started last year and ultimately I purchased a 2020 BMW 330 and I used it for the sole purpose of Turo to generate cash flow and some sort of passive income. And I have to say, it started out pretty good. I implemented several hacks that would boost my profile and drastically, for the first few days, improve my visibility. I got a lot of bookings. And by the way, if you want to look at those hacks, go watch out for that video. It's on my channel. So I made a decent amount of income. All right, so let's go through some of these numbers. So for November, I rented it out very little and I made $204. In December, I did $818, which was actually not bad. And I actually had to miss out on a trip of $143. So I would have gotten pretty close to $1,000 if I had been able to rent it. But there was one trip I had to cancel. I think I had to use the car for something. I don't actually remember. And then we get into January. January, I did $717. February, I did $400. And in March, I already have $232 of booked revenue. You see the income breakdown here, but I don't want to really talk about or focus on the pros. I want to talk about the cons in this video because now I have the experience to actually talk about those, and I essentially didn't back in the time. But the first con is obviously the time constraint. Ultimately, you have to make a calculation of like, how much is my time currently worth based on other investments or jobs and gigs that I have, and then figure out how much time you're spending on Turo so that you have an adequate understanding of how much is this costing you on a time, hourly basis. Every booking takes about an hour at least. And this is because you have to obviously talk to the customer. They're probably gonna ask you a question or two. Even if you have those automations done in Turo, it's still gonna take a second. You likely have to prep the car for them, right? So you gotta clean it, potentially make sure that there's no safety issues, check the tire pressure, etc. And then you actually have to drop off the car, or you have to go meet with them, verify their driver's license, take pictures, and then get back to your house and your day job. Ultimately, all of that takes a decent amount of time. For me, once I got into the habit and a good, flow in place, it was taking a little over an hour. Another big con that happened to me is, I think I mentioned this in detail on the first video, but someone smoked a decent amount of weed in the car and it took me forever to get the smell out. The crazy part is that someone was about to rent a car, so I spent 2-3 hours. I bought so many, Lysol sprays to get the smell out. And Turo doesn't actually make it easy for you to get a reimbursement for something like this, because once I submitted and I said, hey, someone smoked weed in the car, one of the things they asked for is for a picture. I'm like, how can I send you a picture of the aroma that, weed presents? By the grace of God, I actually found some lighters and I found some actual spots and, plastic bags, etc. in the car under the seats. They didn't do a good job of hiding that. Don't forget to subscribe, guys, so you don't miss out on any future reflections, insights, and videos. And always check out the community for some of my active investments and provoking discussions. So those are some of the obviously direct cons when it comes to renting your car on Turo. Now, because I started in the middle of holiday season, end of Q3, beginning of Q4, I actually didn't realize how much upcharge there was for those rates for that time period. So ultimately, when I started, it actually ended up being pretty good because the income was so high. People needed the car much more often. People paid more for the car. Now, once January, February, March kicked around, that's not the case. Those rates came down substantially. Sometimes, instead of me renting a car for $60, $70 a day, I was renting it for $20, $25. So massive difference there. And instead of me having maybe a day or two in between rentals, at most, I was having, renting a car maybe once or twice a week. When you kind of crunch the numbers in that aspect, it would barely pay for the payment of the car if I had one. plus, you know, all of the expenses you already have, like insurance and gas and maintenance, etc. Like I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, I actually got a flat tire in that car. The car was in the shop. I had to cancel 1 or 2 bookings that I had. And then also, because those BMWs have run flats, you can imagine how much it costs to actually replace that. Between having low income for that month, having this flat tire, and bookings disappeared because of that. And I didn't know when the car was going to be available, so I kind of had to block off days. It was a wash for me for that month, and I probably ended up actually losing some money. At the end of the day, there is a burden to run this business and keep it up. It's just not worth the effort for me at this time. So obviously what you have to ask yourself is if you want to start this business, if you have the time, and if this is going to be something that you're going to grow. In hindsight, if I had a different car, if I had a different day job, if my life was structured a little bit different, then maybe this could work. I mean, I'm not saying the Turo doesn't work. It's not something I would never try again. My thought process is, if you remember why I did this in the first place, it was because I went to Dallas and I rented a Lamborghini Urus. What I wanted to do is like, hey, if I drop $200,000 on the Lamborghini Urus, is it possible that I can actually drive the car for the whole year while it pays itself off and I'm actually making money from it, etc., etc. My thought process is, at a car that has that ratio of return. So with the Urus, for instance, you're gonna rent the car out maybe $1,000 to $2,000 per day. Let's call it $1,500 for easy math. Well, if it costs me an hour or 2 to get the car ready and I'm gonna make $1,000 from it, that makes a lot more sense than if I'm still making $40 off of my BMW and still spending the same hour. The numbers just don't line up. That was one thing. The other aspect is how quickly these vehicles depreciate. So for me to have, you know, $30,000 completely parked into a business, I mean, it's a lot of money, right? On 30,000, Turo, it would take about 667 days, not accounting for any expenses. If you do the expenses, that number pretty much doubles, which is pretty close to 4 years. Now, 4 years for me to get that initial investment back is not a bad thing. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the rule of 7, which is typically for you to double your money, it takes 7 years. Any investment that is under 7 years is actually pretty decent. Anything that is above 7 years, obviously you have to kind of reevaluate. So for Turo, the fact that it would take about 4 years for me to get that $30,000, it's not bad. But remember, I'm not actually making money on that. If I put $30,000 in the stock market by the end of year, 7-ish, I'm actually not gonna be at 30, I'm gonna be at 60. With Turo, I'm putting $30,000 in up front, and then I'm gonna make that $30,000 back in 4 years. So for me to double my money, it would take 8 years, not necessarily 7 in other investments. So you got to consider the car, the maintenance, the depreciation. And if you didn't watch the first video, I actually built out an entire spreadsheet that talks about the top cars for Turo and how much money they bring in, what is kind of the profit factor for each one of these cars. So if you want to grab that spreadsheet, it is in the comments on the first video. All right, guys, so if you did watch the first video and this video, why don't you give me a take on how your Turo experience is going, which market you're in, which cars you're in, pros, cons, and if you have some puns, drop them below too. I'll see you guys in the next one.